say it a bit.
Hello, we've change of program today. Minister Belkacem has been delayed, so we'll begin this afternoon with the session on Russia as a player in the innovation game, and then Minister Belkacem will speak, and then we'll have the ceremony for the Cartier Women's Initiative Award winners. Because we're beginning with the Russia session, I have the pleasure to just remind you that we would like you to participate using the Y-Assembly system. So if I could have the Y-Assembly screen, so just to remind you how to do this. Is it up there? So to ask questions, you can SMS to WF13 at the telephone number indicated. You can send in your tweets at hashtag WF13, or you can send in your questions on the internet at app.ysembly.com with the keyword WF13. And now it's my great pleasure, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming the speakers and the moderator for the session on Russia as a player in the innovation game.
Thank you, Jennifer. I know where you sit here. So good afternoon to everyone. This is the session on Russia as a player in the innovation game. And I'm very pleased to have with us a distinguished panel. Our session is going to look at a few themes. That is, how Russia's economy has moved and to what extent beyond the natural resources into having a consumer base integrated, perhaps, a high technology and other innovation sectors. We're going to look at the strengths and perhaps also at the underlying challenges and fragilities for an innovation sector. And I hope that we're going to have fun looking at some of the quite amazing business innovators and tech champions. To do this, we have with us Anna, and I will do it in chronological order, so I will point to them, they will lift their hands. Anna Belova, Dr. Belova, is chairman of the board of directors of JSC, which is also known as RVC in English, Russian venture company. She's president of the Committee 20 organization. She's a professor and deputy dean of the Graduate School of Business of State at the Research University of the High School of Economy, and not the High School of Economy, and a former minister. Natasha Khanjenkova is managing director for Russia at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Maria Krayukhina is managing director of RUNET. And Seda Pumpyanskaya, I'm going to get it out right eventually, is an independent consultant. She used to be the former vice president, head of international relations department of the Skolkovo Foundation. Now, this is an interesting era, looking at, if it's possible, at the way countries, and not just companies only, are innovative. And I brought with me this every year comes out the Global Innovation Index, which Cornell University, INSEAD, and the World Intellectual Property Organization put together. And it's reviewed every year also in the Scientific American. It was the October issue that reviewed it. It's very interesting and well worth reading for anyone interested in it. And I do this on purpose because I do have to do a little bit of marketing myself for my country, Switzerland, which is right at the top, to everyone's utter astonishment. But it has been for some time. And it's particularly interesting because it says that Switzerland, a nation of 8 million, I won't tell you the per capita because it's embarrassingly high, topped the GII, the Global Innovation Index, for the second consecutive year. One hint. It is also #1 in university-industry research collaboration. Very interesting. Here, Russia has gone back a little bit, and we're going to look at its next trajectory upwards in the innovation and what is leading that. To do this, I have a few underlying questions that I'm going to leave for everyone to answer or not answer as they would like. But these are some of the issues that I think we should look at, and I hope that many of you have questions on them. First, on the research and linkages, what we just looked at there. Three issues. The first, if you could look at some of the linkages between research, intellectual property sharing, the commercial production, consumer demand, how is that in place? When all of that line and more is in place, it's a very powerful linkage. So it would be interesting to hear from you what is missing, if there is anything, and how we can strengthen that. Second, the way in which we can put incentives into the framework that would accelerate the translation of research into commercial applications, in fact, into production. And I know some of you have excellent examples of how that has been done. And finally, keeping the pool of both talent and finance from public institutions, let's say the high quality that's done in public institutions of research, keeping them and getting them interested in the other end of the commercial. And finally, on investment. These are underlying themes, and hope that many of you will have some questions on this. There's been a lot of talk about capital outflow. How do you turn it the other way around to keep investment internally into new ventures? There's also, I do not hide, a certain anxiety and uncertainty for external investors regarding, I would call it legal independence or legal certainty in cases. They really don't like tax rates to get rid of competition. So there is an uncertainty. What are we doing about it to reassure? And there's also need for always incentives for private companies to get involved and get more involved. Now, this has been happening marvelously well in Russia. We'd like to hear about it, how it's done, and what more can be done. And finally, an underlying question is, of course, the difficulty of enforcement of intellectual property, where you do have that in several countries around the world, but in Russia, people have questioned how it's going to be done and if it can be done. So these are some of the underlying questions that I leave as a preliminary, and we'll turn right away to you, Dr. Anna Belova. Anna, when we were talking together just before, you told me something about something you call a cement ceiling. What is that?
Thank you. First, it's a great pleasure and a big honor to be here with you today. And I think that the subject of this discussion is more interesting, not specifically for women for minutes, for the whole economy, for the world, how we drive the changes. What can we do? Using the diversity, using some creativity in driving those changes. While we discuss with Marie, what is innovation landscape currently in Russia, I told that we certainly do some progress, but we are on the very beginning of the long road, and currently not all the stones being unturned in that road. First, crystal balls, what need to be done? From my point of view, it's a condition, it's a regulation, it's a cooperation and linkages between the agent of the innovation ecosystem, which are corporates, government, universities, small and medium business. And from my point of view, the most important is the demands, consumer demands and demands in economy. And I mentioned to Marie that currently we worked and have a progress on the three first. But in terms of the demands, I don't know whether you know that 56% of the GDP produced currently in Russia, but state-controlled business. And that means...
Is that gone down from the past? Is 56% a lower or a higher number than 5-6 years ago?
Currently, during the crisis, 2009, it was a little bit enlarged. But mostly, you remember that 20 years, whole economy was state-owned. So It's a big progress. But keeping that in mind, we currently faced with some sort of the cement ceiling in corporate demands in innovation. And from my point of view, it's a key challenge for Russia.
When you say a cement ceiling, Anna, you mean that demand doesn't come up from below or innovation doesn't come up, it gets stopped at a certain level?
From my point of view, to turn Queen Mary, to make this shift from the resource-based economy to the innovation-driven economy, it's extremely important that the process should be bottom-up. But in that case, on the top of the pyramid, it should be strong demand for the innovation. Because if you're supporting the innovation at the first initial stages, the most important for the innovator, somebody will use those innovations. Otherwise, they are taking their researchers or products and leaving the country. And currently, what we are trying to do on the country level, just to drill the holes from the bottom, from the top to the bottom, to try to stimulate that process up to the end.
So you're trying to kind of put that shaft, a corridor, if you wish, from the top. In state-owned companies, how do you do that? Do you put somebody in there, or what is your process?
Actually, 2 years ago, first time Russia adopted the Innovation National Strategy. And as a part of this Innovation National Strategy, it was changes of the regulation, it was a specific chapter devoted to the intellectual property, but everybody realized that the big driver of the demands is the state-controlled companies. It's a big companies. Their procurement process should be turned. Currently, it's strange, but on the state level, the investment into support of the innovation and R&D from Russia and state equally.
With the private, yeah.
Yes, but in Russia, it does not match with the private money. And in US, the state investment into the innovation, it's 1/4, 3/4 is the private money. So we need to reform the university and R&D process, the Academy of the Science, because the professors should not only teach and develop the curriculum, they need to work on the orders of the corporate clients. And that channel, that reconfiguration of the ecosystem is very important.
So you're working on two levels, if I've understood. RVC itself is a fund of funds
Yes.
sort of thing. So you're working at the top level to try and stimulate the state-owned companies as well to have innovation people at the top to help this process. And you're also working at the other level, which is to change the conditions.
Yes. To change the conditions, it's a task of the state.
Yeah.
And your question about flowing the capital, from my point of view, it's like a horse. You can turn the horse to the water, but you can't enable horse to drink. The capital is coming to the place where it's a comfortable condition. You can tell whatever we need the capital. But it's interesting, during the last 5 years, the available capital in the venture investors in Russia raised since 2008 till 2013, 8 times. We started with a $500 million. Currently, it's about $10 billion available.
That's amazing.
On the market.
That's amazing. And your particular...
It's RVC state investment started that process. At the very beginning, the RVC money was 35% of all the available capital. Now the RVC funds, state money, are only 5% of all the money on the venture market in the Russian Federation. All the rest is a private money. And that is the biggest result of the activity, positive activity.
This is some of the things that are not particularly well known. That trend is quite significant. But Natasha, at the EBRD, I know that you have done a study exactly along some of the issues that Anna just raised. It was called Diversifying Russia, because innovation, when we're talking about innovation, we're not really only talking about technological innovation, it's about also the diversification. And it was interesting to me, some of the challenges that came up. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit of the hurdles that innovation comes up against.
Absolutely. I would just like to pick up on what Anna had said, and she focused very much on the demand for innovation, and I do agree that a lot is being done, especially with this opening up of procurement to try and stimulate innovation. Also, of course, the supply, on the supply side, what we do see is some very significant measures to increase the venture capital available, not only RVC, Skolkovo, Rusnana, Внешэконом banks, so there's quite a number of channels that are being used. The ecosystem as well, both legal regulation but also techno parks, business parks, that are all very important to support innovation. But from the research that we've done, and also from our direct experience on the ground, and EBRD is, I would say, a key investor. We've invested over 23 billion euros over the 20 years that we've been working in Russia. What we see is the importance of the overall investment climate.
And it's still questionable, that investment. Give us some concrete stuff of the hurdles that you think need to be jumped over, overcome, or changed.
Maria was referring to a study that we did. A basic part of that study was a survey of businesses. We call it Business Environment and Enterprise Perception Study, and it covered over 4,000 enterprises, and they were asked about the key barriers that they see in their business. And based on their responses, what we understand are the key challenges for businesses, in addition to tax, but I have to say tax comes up in every country where we do this study. But in addition to that, access to skills, corruption, access to finance come up as very important barriers, and also barriers like red tape, like access to electricity, infrastructure, customs procedures. But what was very interesting in this study is that we had a sample of companies that are innovating and either introducing new products or introducing new procedures, processes in their activities. And what was really very telling, that for innovative companies, these obstacles came out as much more important, much more severe in their activity. And that's quite natural, because for them, access to skills, good customs procedures, because they're the ones that either import or export, these elements are much more important for them. They have a much higher demand for quality public services. So the conclusion that I think is extremely important is that in addition to these specific targeted measures to stimulate innovation, it's extremely important to focus on overall business environment.
The almost operational side as well of business.
Yeah. I think what we found, and this is experienced from around the world, that innovation goes hand in hand with entrepreneurship. And what is right now a weakness in Russia is actually entrepreneurship, development of small and medium enterprises. The pace of entry of new companies has slowed down. The share of SMEs in the economy is significantly lower than you see in other parts of the world, both in employment, in GDP. What again is very striking is what we call the missing middle, whereas you have a significant number of SMEs, middle-sized manufacturing companies, the ones that are more likely to innovate, to take part in export activities, which is also linked with innovation. These are very, very small. So we believe that measures to improve the investment climate are really very important to support other measures.
We often talk just vaguely about the investment climate, but actually you're talking about very concrete things on the ground, improving customs regulations and things like this, which are doable. These aren't very, very difficult, well, they're always annoying, but they can be done. These are not impediments. Is there anything of a serious impediments kind that you think will need real state intervention?
No, I do think that these areas that I've talked about, the red tape, the customs, the access to electricity
that's the biggest
infrastructure,
annoyance,
these are things that the government really needs to focus on. What also is extremely important is this element of skills. And by the way, when we started to look at assessment of availability of skills, this came quite as a surprise to a Russian audience, because Russia has always been very proud of the education system and qualified resources. But what we see now is many companies, many investors, and especially in regions, they are concerned about
retaining skills.
Retaining, developing skills, attracting
Is that
skills.
because also there's been an export of some skills in the entrepreneurial area?
I think there has been some export of skills, but I think what is more important is linking the education system much closer to what is needed by
which Anna
business.
brought up
Exactly.
a minute ago. That linkage, as I said, sort of chain of linkage. However, we'll come back to it in a minute. There is some good news.
Absolutely. I'd love to share that with you.
In the regions. Before you do, I'd like to challenge a little bit what you said about medium-sized companies. There are many hidden champions coming out of Russia. We don't know about them. We don't read about them. Somehow or other, they're not in our newspapers. And Maria, I'd like to turn to you from Runet, which itself is a VC investment fund. Give us some examples of things we don't know.
Yeah, okay.
Can you hold the microphone closer?
Yeah, okay. So it's an honor to be here, and I'm actually very happy that I can talk about Russia and about things I know. I've been working in this industry for 15 years, and what I know is about internet and information technology. That's where our fund invests we have about 40 companies now in the portfolio. So I guess many people know about Russia, that it's all about oil and gas. Probably many people know vodka, matryoshka, and I probably know Hermitage Museum. But I think what people have to realize that Russia is actually one of the biggest countries in Europe in terms of internet audience. I think now we have about 70 million, which is probably already bigger than Germany and definitely bigger than UK and France. And Russia is a country which basically does not have Google, Amazon, eBay, or Facebook as the leaders in those respective areas. Russia is a country where in the search we have a company called Yandex.
Hold the microphone closer.
Yeah, okay. We have a company called Yandex in Russia, which is a leader in search. It's now a public company since 2011. The valuation is $13 billion. It's one of the best technology companies in the world, actually, coming out of Russia. In Facebook, we have a company called Cattaui, which has about 100 million users inside Russia and about the same amount of users outside Russia, also Russian-speaking users. And I think what those companies done is that they've actually used inefficiencies of Russia. They've used the fact that Russia, especially when some of those companies were created 10 years ago, Russia was a very scary place for investors to invest. So Google didn't come to Russia, Facebook didn't come to Russia at that time. So people and entrepreneurs took the time and came with ideas and built very strong and very successful companies. There's a company in Russia called Kiwi. Basically, Russia is a country which has a very low credit card penetration. So 95% of e-commerce has been done on cash on delivery. So there is a company which helped people to make payments for various small services, online services, called Kiwi. It has approximately, I think, 65 million consumers using the service every month, and it was also taken public this year, and I think the valuation is about 3 billion now. It has grown significantly since.
But tell me something just on that, Maria, if you don't mind. We were talking about trust in online. You say you don't have, Amazon and eBay and so on, equivalents in Russia. Are people using online services, or is there still some difficulties or some mistrust?
I think there is more difficulties in Russia than in some other parts of the world for people to use credit cards, for example, online to pay for services. And there is also less trust for people that the companies would actually deliver the service or good which is being promised. So I think that's create an additional obstacle for an e-commerce or technology company to grow in Russia.
So it's more on the service delivery side than on the actual innovation. It's on the other end that is the difficulty?
Yeah, and infrastructure is also quite difficult in Russia. So I think companies have to be very innovative to overcome certain problems. For example, in Russia, Russian Post works very badly. So if you try to send something, I would never recommend anybody to do it by Russian Post. And actually DHL and companies like that are very, very expensive. So e-commerce companies had to create a thing called pickup point, which does not exist yet anywhere in the world, which is basically helps companies to deliver goods to people without using Russian Post, for example.
So what do they use? A private system of delivery?
They basically build their own infrastructure, for example, and then they use different small and medium companies for certain parts of the delivery, and then they allow people to pick up it from a certain point, making...
So that service in itself is a business innovation.
Yeah, that is a business innovation, which is actually eBay is taking to do the same in US this year. But it has been done in Russia already for quite a while. Because in Russia, companies would not exist without such an approach.
I see. Any other company that you want to bring to our attention?
I think that Kaspersky, which is antivirus software, which has 300 million users, or maybe more now, I believe, worldwide. There is a game company. There is a game called Cut the Rope, which has 500 million users, which came out of Russia. It's a Russian company. And actually, there is a very interesting example, which I learned today, which I did not know, because it was a secret. It's actually an investment of Anna's fund, one of Anna's funds, and it's Evernote. It actually came out of Russian. It's initially a Russian company with a Russia-backed capital, and now it's also a very successful company with a valuation of $1 billion.
And why was it secret? What is secret? That it's a Russian company was not known.
Yeah, it was nobody knew that actually is a Russian company.
And where is it located now?
Now it's moved to United States.
It's in America, in the Silicon Valley company.
Yeah, it's a Silicon Valley company now, yes.
And now they revealed that it's actually a Russian company.
Yeah, it's actually, we revealed it during the forum.
Thank you very much. Yes,
May
Dana.
I comment a little bit? Because actually, it's returned back to the question of the image.
Yes.
And when they start the company, made the first round, and they realized that they need strong investment for the second round to multiply and to provide a fast growth of the business. They moved to the California, but they decided not to disclose that it is a Russian startup because they positioning themselves at the Silicon Valley, California startup, and they raised the American investment money. And they were very, very successful. And I hope that next Russian startups will not keep in a secret their origin.
Seda, that comes exactly to some of the work that you've been doing, which is very much on tackling the problem, as you did at Skolkovo. The image that there is, the external knowledge, or the image of Russia as a place in which innovation can happen. Perhaps you could tell us just a little bit. First of all, how is that image changing? And second, what did you do differently at Skolkovo that starts perhaps to be copied, to be fruitful at this moment?
Well, I think we have to thank the forum who formulated very well the subject of this discussion. Russia as a player in the innovation game. The first statement, Russia is a player. The second one, which I think you hear from our voices, Russia is a serious player. There is an innovation game. And who determines this innovation game? Because the innovation game today becomes more and more global. I think if we look 10 years ago, 20 years ago, certain markets held kind of priority in the innovation. I think today it becomes more and more diversified. And in the course of the last 10 years, Russia certainly came into this market, came very strongly, came with success stories, which were mentioned by Anna, and which become global. Many people know Kaspersky, almost everybody. Many people know Yandex. That means that these are companies which grew out of Russia, grew on a kind of a regional level and grew to the world level, which is very important. It means that Russia becomes a very interesting place for investment in spite of all the difficulties. And it means that in Russia there is a certain amount of money, venture capital or other money, etc., which can be channeled into the support of innovation. That's how Skolkovo project was born. It's a very interesting idea. I don't know whether it's the state drilling the hole down towards innovation and trying to meet with young people who are full of ideas, maybe, but that's how things in Russia are done. I'll probably start personal. 2 years ago, and I'm Russian, but I spent 15 years outside Russia, and I got a fantastic offer to come and work for this multi-million-dollar project launched by the government of supporting innovation called Skolkovo Foundation. I couldn't resist, and I couldn't resist, first of all, and that's Maria's question, because Russian image is not great, and we know that. It's not only about matryoshkas, vodka, etc. It's about lots of good things, but it's also about corruption and other things. So I thought it's a fantastic opportunity to come and see what can be done. The basis of this idea is very simple. In Russia, there are many talented people. And I always saw Skolkovo Foundation as a possibility to address the subject of what can be done as means and infrastructure for those talented people. What does it mean? How do you imagine a Russian scientist? You kind of think of a crazy person sitting somewhere on the dacha and inventing something. This person probably wouldn't have any idea of business or commercialization. And I think this is the most important subject, the bondage and linkage. These are the words which I think appeared in the discussions of everybody. And recreating this link, which was kind of broken in 75 years of communist regime. How do you think of Russian young people? I come and I meet my nephew, who is 18 years old, who is on the first course of chemical faculty. And the first thing which he tells me, he says, I have some type of know-how for the detergent, I want to commercialize it, I want to create my firm. That means that the conditions in Russia have changed and there are lots of young people with lots of ideas and with the idea to go into business to commercialize it. So the idea of Skolkovo Foundation, which is a unique, unprecedented project of an unprecedented scale, was to put together sort of an infrastructure for all those people, recreating linkages. First of all, university and studies. By the way, if we open Nobel Prize lists, what do we see? We open, for example, the medical prizes. It's always Harvard University or Yale University or something like that. Or if you look at the...
well, when you get to mathematics...
Oh, yes. Or if you look at the career of the professor, it's kind of moving in between all these universities. Why? Because probably those places have an ecosystem which supports innovation. So for the first time, we're trying to put studies and research, because in Russia it used to be two separate institutions, completely separate.
And now
and now they're together. And then bringing business, because this is the second link which we talked about. Startups, ideas, whoever has the ideas, and the commercialization. Big business, small business, venture capital firms. In kind of a matchmaking, which, by the way, makes sense. And building a city for 30,000 people on the outskirts of Moscow, trying to put it all together.
Look, Seda and the other, just on this issue, you've tried to put them together. In fact, you've been quite successful in some ways. Where is the difficulty? Because there still is a difficulty. Is it because there is not the habit of, as there haven't been in some countries, even in Europe, of the research establishment, the professors say, what? I'm going to make money out of IP, how awful, what a terrible thing to do. But actually realizing that the commercialization of their, they can share the IP, there are ways in which this is done, and allowing the private sector to come in. Or are there impediments that are built into the regulatory structure? What is the most important of those difficulties that you had to overcome?
I think on different levels there are difficulties. Certainly on regulatory one.
There is one in the regulatory.
This is something, and the issue of the intellectual property is a very sensitive and a very difficult one all over the world.
What is the problem in Russia about the enforcement of intellectual property rights, the implementation?
I wonder whether in the room, out of the Russian delegation, we have specialists on intellectual property rights.
Anna will answer that one.
First of all, during the many years, the most professors worked on the state money. And so we do have a number of the very interesting ideas, inventions, or potential business models lying on the tables or in the shelves. But not all the investors are running to come in to make the deal.
Are they allowed to? Would they be allowed to?
Yes, because up to the last year, the IP problem wasn't resolved. For the first reason, if you invest and then state will come and say, oh, but that idea was developed or that product was created on my money, what we can do? So just at the end of the previous year, it was adopted, the new law, which resolves this collision.
Embarrassing question to you, and you don't have to really answer it. Do you think it is going to be enforced, that new law?
I think yes.
Because there is a problem sometimes, let's say, a kind of a displacement between the law and the judiciary.
But now it is a clear framework, how you can take this, who is honored. And state almost refused from its right for this innovation for the company which should be created under the universities and the personalities who did this invention. And I think it will be the huge driver to commercialize all those works, because now there are a clear owner, company and the persons.
That's interesting. I want to hear one more thing. We discussed before that there is one sort of set of parameters that happens from the center. That is, that happens from central government, more likely in the large cities like in Moscow and Petersburg and so on. But there's also something else that's happening. Russia is, well, as you know very well, a country of great, vast regions. And apparently, much like happened in India, by the way, some innovation in the political and regulatory structure, in the way things are implemented, happen more freely, if I could put it this way, more interestingly in the regions. Tell us what is happening there.
Yeah, gladly, because this is the good news that I wanted to share. And by the way, there was a question from the audience.
Yes, we're looking at the questions coming in. So please keep sending your questions in. They're on the screen in front of us.
About how can investment in innovation be sustainable if there is, for instance, corruption. But this is where I think it's extremely important to look at the differences in the various regions in Russia. And when we did our study that I mentioned before, we looked not only at just 4,000 companies, but we looked at companies by regions, and the study and the analysis covered 37 regions. And what was really very telling was that you had some regions that were very much advanced and were very successful in attracting investment, in developing SMEs, in attracting foreign investment because of the specific policies that they were implementing. And these policies included the creation of this one-stop shop to cut through the red tape, to make sure that companies don't face administrative barriers, setup of electronic government, again, a very good method to fight corruption, because this is where you have much more objective decisions and direct contact with authorities to have those decisions transparently made. Some regions have been very successful in setting up technoparks, business parks, in linking up with investors to
Just
improve.
what Seda was saying, getting the pieces together.
Yeah, to improve training. I'm sure that you must have heard about Russia's ambitions to move up the rating of doing business, a study that the World Bank is doing, and lots of efforts are being made there. But
where does Russia rank right now on that study? Not very, very high, huh?
I think it was 112, no, 112.
Yes,
it moved up.
Initially 122, and now it's up to 112.
And we're very hopeful that in the next coming round that there will be some success. But what is interesting is when the study is done, it's looked at the Russia overall. But if you look at some of the regions that we've studied, they're much, much higher up. If the assessment
region was taken independently.
If the assessment of Russia was based on that region, Russia would be much higher up in this study. So I think that's...
yeah, the questions that are asking here, very much to that.
Yeah, exactly. And the good news, in addition to the fact that the regions are different, is the fact that the Russian government has understood these issues, and there are specific measures that are being taken. And sort of two directions that I'm following and where I'm quite impressed. The Ministry of Economy and there's a special agency for strategic initiatives have developed a number of roadmaps to address these specific obstacles that have been identified in the Doing Business study. And these are very, very specific on how to improve customs procedures, how to enhance competition, how to reduce the red tape and reduce the permits and licensing in construction projects and so on. So these roadmaps are being, some of them have been approved and are being implemented. And I think the difference that I see now is that they are being designed together with the private sector, and the private sector is monitoring their implementations. And in addition to these federal roadmaps, they are roadmaps that are developed for the regions to improve the investment climate. And private business is taking part in assessing the success. And this assessment is included in the evaluation of the regional authorities' work.
Well, that is looking towards the question. We have some questions here. One of them is specifically, how is Russia trying to improve its ranking? And that must be one, because 112 is kind of awful, and it should be somewhere else. So these kinds of things will definitely improve its ranking. But there was another question earlier. I'm going to come down, and I hope we can have some questions from the floor as well. Some of you out there ready to, do you have any questions on your hands? Do you want to show me if you've got any hands up there? Are we going to start some questions or not? Please start thinking. I'm going to come and get some questions from you. One of the questions that we had before was, how willing is Russia to cooperate with others? How really, what is the reality on that? And I'm not sure if they're talking about Russia as a country on a macro level or in business, but we can come to it. You wanted to say something, so please start thinking of questions. Anna, you wanted to talk about IP also, enforcement or not? No.
Actually,
Tell me,
answering your question,
ranking.
how Russia is going to cooperate. First issue is a clear framework of the procedures. And second is transparency and the way of the resolution. So it's way of the resolutions of business conflicts.
Oh, I see.
And I think both are very important and linked to another issue, which is a big discussion currently in the Russian society, the independence of the court system. And as one part of the strategic initiative on the improvement of the investment climate and naturally the reputation, the business reputation, is the creation, as Natasha just mentioned, in the regions, a special investment council near the governors, together with the private business. And they are monitoring and checking. And one window to claim, and based on the amount of the claims of the investors, the KPIs of the governors have been established. So if 2 years ago no one governor was really interested, do they have the problem with the investors? Doesn't matter. Russian private investors or international private investors. Now it's a KPI. It's a public measuring of his efficiency, which is a most
Very
important
different, yes.
shift.
That's an enormous shift. Look, I would love to believe that in a very short period of time, you can change bad habits, to make it a very nice word, not a very nasty word. But the independence of the judiciary is a very difficult thing to establish, and needs a real willingness, both on people to hold accountable the government and on the government side to actually give up that power. Do you think that that is possible today? Or is it something that needs to start more, perhaps on a regional level before it happens at a more central level?
It's not an easy question to have the binary answer, yes or no. I think we all try to work on that question. And important issue is that we realize that to change that will be one of the critical items in the new picture of the new Russia.
Thank you very much, Anna. Did you want to say anything on any of these questions, Seda?
Yes, I wanted
Maria?
to add. I think coming back to this question, today Russia wants to be a serious player. I think there is a very clear understanding that Russia wants to be a place where business can be done, like Margaret Thatcher, who said it about Gorbachev. I think Russia wants to be a place where there could be good climate for investment. There can be discussion. Russia is an extremely interesting place for investment. The figures are fantastic, but obviously there are risks, but that's how we live. And these are the image things and other things where we're trying to overcome in one way or another. In our project, if we speak about this, we had a special law, we had special rules for customs, etc., etc.
But you don't want it special,
But
you want it universal.
We want it
these
universal,
kinds of
and of course we
conditions.
understand that we are, at the end of the day, a huge project, but a modest attempt to create a place with, well, it's kind of an infrastructure project. If it's successful, then it can be repeated on other places of Russia.
I'm going to see if there are any questions out there. It's hard with the lights, excuse me. Does anyone have, yes, right in the front here. Do you have a microphone there? Lovely, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
I have rather not a question, but a comment.
I'm sorry, could you identify yourself?
A comment, Natalia Guляeva, Hogan Level CIS. I'm a lawyer, and intellectual property is very close to my heart. And basically what I would like to say is that, of course, as my colleagues from the Russian delegation said absolutely correctly, nothing is ideal in the area of intellectual property in Russia these days. But I think many countries may say the same for their territory. But what's happening, I'm the lawyer who pleads before the Russian courts almost every day, sometimes twice a day. And I have been practicing intellectual property law now for 15 years. So I can compare what was in Russia 15 years ago and now. And this is a huge progress. This is really a huge progress. Many colleagues of mine from Europe or from Asia or from the United States do admire the results which we bring to our clients.
What caused that change?
First, a lot of changes in the courts. The judges during all these years have been trained to deal with the intellectual property matters. Say 10 years ago, patent law case could bring a judge to a confusion, so he or she relied entirely.
A commercial training as well as a legal one, the implications of intellectual property.
I think that training is being provided to the judges these days, and moreover, now in July 2013, we have got an additional forum for intellectual property dispute resolution, which is the Russian Intellectual Property Court based in Moscow. And I have already had a chance to plead before these courts, and I'm very happy about that. And most important, one more thing to say is that the proceedings before the Russian courts for, not just for intellectual property, but for other matters, are extremely speedy. We had a case where we've got an intellectual property while the board, where we were able to go through the proceedings before the court of first instance, first appeal and second appeal, and even to revision during 7 months, which is not possible in any other country in the world, I think. Fast. So my basic comment is that even if there are things to be improved, there are now very many things which are developing.
And the important thing is that both on the national level, on the government level, as well as on the business level, they're aware of these changes and pushing to get them to happen. Thank you very much for that intervention. Yes, please. Yes, go ahead. And then, please, anyone else, put up your hand so I can see if there's anyone else now who would like to pose a question.
I just wanted to add to this, because there was a question about ranking and where Russia is in its ranking in doing business. What is very interesting that when the business ranking ratings are determined, there are a number of factors that are looked at. And what is really pulling Russia down to a very low ranking is access to electricity and construction permits. Whereas contract enforcement, by the way, Russia is very high up.
That's interesting.
In the ranking for contract enforcement.
You would have thought that of India, maybe, on infrastructure lack, but with a country as rich in natural resources as Russia, that's, I think, most irritating, it must be. Yeah,
Let me jump on this. I remember I was kind of laughing or whatever reading this report, because Moscow is much worse than some provincial cities, because to get a bill for the electricity when you establish your office takes ages. So it's all about bureaucracy. But
so it's bureaucracy again.
But this report is very good. It also gives some recipes for those who want to do business.
So very shortly we can see a rise in those rankings. Maria, did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think we should also look not only on the top level, which is like how Russia is willing to cooperate, but also look at how Russian entrepreneurs is willing to cooperate. And I think that now they're very interested in international exposure, they're very interested in international experience, and I think that now actually the number of investors have been grown significantly. There are funds, well-known funds, which have never invested in Russia, which came over the last 3 years. So I think that on the bottom level, actually, and I think if you look at, you have to look at separate industries. If you look at internet and information technology, I think Russia is actually one of the best countries for investment.
That's very interesting. So, anyone else would like to pose another question to this panel on the business? In the front, please, here.
I'm a small French investment consulting company. I've been working in and with Russia for 23 years now, and I'm really impressed by the progresses. I would like to ask to you about Skolkovo, if you can give us some concrete ideas of how it's working now, how many companies are already settled on the site, and how is the linkage established between them, how it works with the universities and the research.
All yours, Seda.
Yes, well, there are about 1,000 companies which got the status of participant of Skolkovo Foundation. Basically, it's startups. We work in 5 areas: biomedical, IT, of course, these are the leaders, nuclear and space, the 2 traditional difficult state industries in Russia, and efficiency of energy. So this is a result of, well, whatever, about a year and a half. The amount of companies is growing. Obviously, and by the way, they're getting grants. This is one of the most important things, and problems, because access to finance is a problem. So obviously, dealing with the funding and giving grants is a huge help to the people with ideas, whether they're startups or whatever. On the university side, it's a very huge challenge. We signed an agreement with MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, to create a university called Tech. It's not an MIT branch or brand. It's an attempt to create something similar on European territory, not just Russian territory, which could be partner of MIT. It's an extremely interesting process. And once again, it's an idea to create kind of a hub which will have studies and research, etc. By the way, one of the challenges of Skolkovo Foundation is to make this place really international. We always aimed at 50% internationals, professors, students, researchers, personnel, etc., etc. And that's a big challenge, but that's also a good sign, because that's a sign that Russia wants to play internationally, Russia wants to be international.
Maria, did you want to say anything before about an answer to another question? Did you want to answer one of the cooperation? I thought you wanted to say something on whether people really are cooperating.
said, I think that actually, probably on a country level, this is more for my colleagues to actually comment, because I work only in the private sector with technology companies. And as I said, in technology, entrepreneurs are very willing to cooperate, and I think there are a lot of well-educated people, so many of the rules of investment and the game is actually exactly the same as everywhere in the world.
Go ahead, Marie, because I do, Anna, Marie, I did want to ask you one question on that. In your pipeline now, without divulging anything, how rich is your pipeline of new coming up projects? Is one of your difficulties actually finding people who are willing to take that kind of risk, put your money into them and nurture them, or do you have a pretty big demand for your services?
That's a very good and very difficult, actually, question. And I think currently in Russia, there is not so many early stage companies, and that's where Skolkovo comes into play to actually bring the early stage companies in technology and internet. So I can say that we have a very large pipeline of companies where we want to invest today in Russia. But on later stages, there are a lot of very good companies.
Okay, that's in a way a difficulty, that there's not more demand from the ground, so to speak, for you. That is a difficulty. Anna?
While we're talking about the not proclaiming that we need to turn from the resource-based economy to the innovation-based economy, what we are doing currently, we're developing a very certain set of the measures, the roadmap, and understanding the difficulties on each stage. We try to cooperate from the state level and from the private level. For example, nursery stages is Skolkovo. When the people with ideas coming, having the huge experience from Skoltech international professors who can share them, who can adjust the ideas. And then the second stage with the Russian venture companies providing, like setting up the series of the funds for the different industries, together with the private money, just to be able for those startups to move to the next stage, to raise the next money for the internet companies, for the new technologies, for the biomed companies. Then they come into the industry funds, to the cluster funds. Incubators and incubator projects can go to the Russian Fund of Technology Development, to the RVC funds. So what we are trying to do just to set up the complete infrastructure to move forward step by step. You know, Anna, and we're taking the lessons.
You represent right here that kind of chain, if I could say so, from what is needed in the general environment all the way to the incubator, the nursing, the work on the levels, and of course the final product, getting those entrepreneurs off the ground. Look, I want to tell everybody that the minister has arrived, and we're going to close this session, but with one last round, and then please stay here and the minister will come directly. My last round to you is this, that I'm going to ask you all. Russia suffers from a not so good reputation in the business world. Let's just talk about the business world, the business innovation world. Not when you're doing a big deal with a big state-owned company or something like that, but it suffers from a reputation. Can I take that risk? Can I really partner with somebody? Can I invest there, or can I trust? So I would like you to perhaps leave a message with this audience, one message each of you, of what you think either should be done, is being done, or you want unusual that you want them to retain in their minds when they leave this room. So I'm going to start with you, Seda. What would you want?
Just believe that Russia is different today. Don't believe stereotypes. Don't believe usual things that you hear. They do exist. Problems exist. There are lots of difficult things. There is climate which is not ideal. But as we already said, Russia has changed. Fantastic companies are coming on the market. The climate has changed, etc., etc. Just believe and try.
So keep following the change.
And like the slogan of this conference, what is it? Compete. We're competing. Cooperate. Probably we should do better and create.
And that's going on. Maria.
I think people should try coming to Russia and learn more, meet with the companies, meet with entrepreneurs, and see how the country has changed over the years.
So come and see us. See the reality on the ground. Natasha.
I'd like to echo what Seda was saying, just giving the example of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We've supported more than 700 successful projects in Russia. We've supported many foreign investors who are very satisfied with their investment in Russia. And when I work in the Foreign Investment Advisory Council, when I hear other investors, those who have invested in Russia and have developed their business, they are pleased overall with the results. That doesn't mean that there are no challenges, and challenges need to be overcome, but
it can be done.
But it can be done, and there are very good opportunities.
Anna, please leave us with the final word now.
Russia is a really surprising country. And it was during the many hundred history of the country. And I just recently got the information, not recently, at the beginning of this year, which was published in the Wall Street Journal, and was the report by Dow Jones Venture Source. And they published that in recent years, there has been a boom in venture capital investment in Russia. And the Russia now is the fastest growing market in Europe. 3-5 years ago, nobody can believe to that. Currently, in 2012, Russia is among top 4 European countries on venture capital investment. And my great will and wish is that we do have a huge opportunity. It's already been done in 10 years back, when Russia was behind in some technological decisions, business opportunities. There was no any cellular network at the beginning of the 90s in Russia. And we jump through the analog cellular technology to the digit. And we were ahead of the whole European communication company in terms of the growth, in terms of the amount of the population using this.
And now it's in terms of venture
And now
capital.
we are having a next challenges in the new technologies. Of course, we do have a lot of the problem with the research center, with this number of the stairs to go to the top. But I strongly believe that it's a unique opportunity to launch the business and technology in Russia.
Well, let's end on that forward trend, an upward trend, and I ask you to give a big hand to this incredible group. Thank you. Ladies? Remain seated, please. Thank you.